Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for this opportunity for Voice of America and NRT TV.
It's glad to be with you.
Thank you. I'd like to start with the term of New Iraq. What the New Iraq brought for the Iraqis?
Well, it gave the Iraqis the opportunity to set up a political system based on their choice. It gave them the opportunity to shape their own future. It was a gift from the armed forces and the government of the United States by getting rid of the dictator, Saddam Hussein, and to assist the Iraqis to make decisions for themselves, the people of Iraq, not one person, one party, but all the communities of Iraq coming together to make decisions for themselves. That was the definition or the meaning of a new Iraq for the United States, that different communities come together and decide for their future together.
The Iraqis, they elected their government, as you mentioned, but they are suffering from the lack of the services. Why is that? Is the democracy can be put separate from the services for the Iraqi people?
The Iraqis, unfortunately, the leadership of the various groups did not rise to the occasion, although we too made some mistakes at the beginning for going for occupation rather than for transferring authority quickly to the Iraqis by dissolving the army and not having enough forces to maintain security, and for doing de-Baathification, but doing it through a political committee rather than through judiciary. So we made some mistake of our own. But I believe that the Iraqi leaders made some serious errors. Rather than coming together, rising to the occasion, making decisions in the interest of all Iraqis, they fell into the trap of sectarianism, and the neighborhood, the regional powers used Iraq as a battlefield for advancing or advocating for their ideas. And the Iraqis did come to an agreement, the majority, on a federal arrangement and for sharing the riches of Iraq, which it is a very rich country, but they did not implement it, and they have failed largely to provide the kind of services that the Iraqi people are entitled to and deserve. So there has been a failure of leadership to deliver, to rise to the occasion, seizing the opportunity given to them.
Every diplomat, every politician in Iraq or outside of Iraq, they are mentioning a matter of interfering by regional power in the Iraqi affairs. But the question is, why the Iraqi leaders, they accept this kind of interference?
That's an unfortunate fact of history, that some of these leaders spend time in exile. And during the period of exile, they came under the influence of the countries in which they lived, especially if you lived in the Middle East, in a place like Iran, where in order to do anything, you have to cooperate with the security institutions of the neighboring countries in order to get a work permit, in order for your kids to go to school, in order to get a passport to travel, in order to organize, you need to cooperate with them. And some of them, although the situation has changed and Iraq has become independent and they are now part of the ruling elite of Iraq, the influence that the foreign security establishments that acquired vis-a-vis them continues, unfortunately. And besides, there has been an unfortunate weakness towards receiving financial support, and that too is a way to gain influence. And then there is the difficulties of the situation. The fight among the various internal groups also has brought about dependence on others to get assistance for that fight, whether it's military assistance, whether it's financial assistance. So, and besides, the big powers themselves in the region, they are exerting a lot of pressure, and some of the conflicts in Iraq have become proxy conflicts representing regional powers.
You, as an American diplomat and as a former ambassador to Iraq, what are you expecting that observers calling Iraq is a war-torn country rather than a new Iraq?
Well, later on, of course, it became war-torn, but the hope, the expectation, the desire, I can say, on the part of the United States was for a new Iraq that would set an example for the region, that there is a different way rather than authoritarianism, dictatorship, one ethnic or sectarian group dominating, one family, one tribe dominating everyone else. That like other parts of the world which had gone through a difficult period of dictatorial systems, dynastic autocracies, that the people of this region too in time will rise to the occasion, and when the opportunity given, they will come together and decide on a path for the future. Now, transitions have been difficult in a lot of places. So we're talking about Iraq and the Middle East now, so we're emphasizing their difficulties. But transiting from a dictatorial, authoritarian regime to a democracy, from ethnic and sectarian conflicts to coming to agreement on new rules of mutual acceptance and consensus is not easy, and particularly in an area where regional powers are in competition with each other, where there is a lot of foreign interference, makes it particularly hard.
Do you believe that Iraq is going to fall apart?
Well, that's one risk, one future for Iraq, for it to fall apart. But the other is that the difficulties that Iraq has faced, the suffering that the Iraqis have faced, could get them to come to an agreement better than they have done in the past in terms of implementing the agreement. Come to an agreement. Now they've experienced this terrible decades, more than a decade of conflict, and the suffering under Saddam, which was enormous. That they would come to an agreement which would require mutual acceptance, that all citizens are equal, regardless of ethnicity or sect. It's a state based on citizenship, and that accommodation takes place through decentralization, whether it takes the form of federalism or confederalism, power sharing, to build trust and bridges of confidence. And if they do that, then separation or division of Iraq can be avoided, in my view. But if they don't, one option clearly is for a separation on the part of some. And the Kurds have already expressed clearly an interest in going their own way.
I'm coming back to the Kurds question, but how the Iraqis, they can reach an agreement while they are not accepting each other, while there is the lack of confidence, the lack of trust between each other. Let's talk about Shia and Sunnis. Let's talk about Shia and Kurds, Sunni and Kurds too.
Yeah, that is the unfortunate circumstances that currently prevail, and there is a huge struggle going on region-wide between Shia and Sunni, and there is no consensus and mutual acceptance between them, and that is in part because of the now regional rivalry. On the one side is Iran, using in part Shia groups such as Hezbollah or the Alawites in Syria and other Shiite religiously motivated groups to advance its geopolitical interest to become the preeminent power in the region. And on the other hand, you have Saudis and Turks who support more Sunni groups, sometimes even some extremist Sunni groups, in the struggle against the Shia and in the struggle to block Iran. In recent years, Iran has had more of a success in advancing its agenda, and now the Saudis and others are fighting back. And it may be that for this region to stabilize, for an agreement to be made of the kind that I talked about, mutual acceptance of each other, consensus, respect, and power sharing among ethnic and sectarian groups, you first need a broader regional agreement between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey. It could be similar to what happened in Europe after the Catholics and Protestants fought each other in the famous 30-year religious war. Afterwards, the kings of Europe got together, said Catholicism and Protestantism are equally valid sects of Christianity, and agreed on rules not to interfere in each other's affairs, accept each other. A similar arrangement may be necessary in this region between Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. If that doesn't happen, it may be difficult for internal forces, Iraqis, for example, to come to an agreement. If the Turks are pulling some in one direction, if the Saudis are pulling some in the other direction, if the Iranians are pulling them in yet a third direction. So it is possible that in that scenario of chaos continuing, that some may decide, as the Kurds are saying, that they want to establish their own state, but to do it peacefully in agreement with Baghdad.
The main powers in Middle East area or in the region surrounding Iraq, I mean, they support either Shia or Sunnis. Mr. Ambassador, who's supporting Kurds?
Well, the Kurds have good relations with a number of countries. Of course, in the fight against Daesh, when Daesh was threatening Erbil, it was the United States that came to the support of the Kurds. And the relationship between the US and the Kurds of Iraq has improved in the security domain significantly in the course of the last 2 years. Similarly, the Kurds of Syria have developed good relations with the United States. And the Kurds also have good relations with Turkey now, especially the government in Erbil has a good relationship with Turkey and understanding with Turkey, but also with some of the other powers, including Iran, including with some of the Arab states. It may be that the Kurds, when you compare them to the Sunnis or Shia, have the most diverse set of relationships in the region, while others are more exclusive with the Arab states or with Iran or with Turkey. The Kurds seem to have a much more broader set of engagement, particularly with the United States, but they also have relations with Russia, they have relations with, as I mentioned, with Turkey, they have relations with Iran and with others too.
But do you think the definition of relations, it means support for the political dream for the Kurds?
No, not necessarily. That the idea of an independent Kurdistan, not everyone supports that. I think a lot of powers support a federal Iraq or even a confederal Iraq in which Kurds would be accommodated in a united Iraq. But I believe that if there was an agreement that accommodation could not take place, but on the other hand there could be an agreement peacefully between Baghdad and Erbil, for Erbil to, for the Kurds of Iraq to acquire independence, and that's based on an agreement, then a lot of countries would accept that. But if there is no agreement, that support declines, that fewer countries would be supportive of an independent Kurdistan if there is no agreement, and particularly if there is fear of violence and conflict between the Kurds of Iraq and Baghdad.
The ground between, or let me say, the common ground between Baghdad and Erbil. There is no any sign in it to see that there will be an agreement soon or next year or in a couple of years. Everything, they are divided about that. How about this?
Well, I don't know whether they have started to talk with each other seriously about the future. And I have the impression that some people in Baghdad, including people in the government, have said, we want to know what the intentions of the Kurdish leadership, what their intentions are, and we should talk and discuss that. It's clear that most leaders in Baghdad would prefer not for us to separate, but I believe that if separation comes, they would like to see it done peacefully rather than through a war. On the other hand, in Kurdistan, there has been a statement made, a number of statements made by the President Barzani, about a possible referendum to see what the Kurdish people in Iraq want. The date for that referendum and the question that the referendum will focus on, what will be the people asked to say yes or no to, has not been yet decided. But I understand that the Kurdish leadership has also said that it would like to and it wants to engage with Baghdad, and that no matter what happens, they would like to have good, friendly relations with Baghdad. The issue is, the question is, practically, what is the timeline for any decision? What is the decision? When is the engagement beginning? Who is engaging whom? When? Is it the engagement going to happen before a referendum? Is the engagement going to happen after the referendum on the issues of the future relationship between Baghdad and Erbil? Is a referendum necessary if there is an agreement between Baghdad and Erbil? All of those issues are issues that the two sides face.
Well, both capitals, Baghdad and Erbil, they live in political chaos. Yeah. There's a lot of disagreements, even within the Kurds and the Shiites and Sunnis in Baghdad too. Right. In this such environment, is there any chance to have such an agreement?
Well, it really depends on the leadership. I mean, of course, there are different factions, different groups, and as you say correctly, there are different points of view, not unanimity. But then there are leaderships that have responsibility. Clearly, in the case of Erbil, the principal responsibility lies with the president, President Barzani, although other leaders also matter. And in the case of Baghdad, the principal responsibility is on the shoulder of Mr. Abadi. The question is, have the representatives of these two leaders come to some agreement? Have they started an authoritative dialogue about the future relations and the issues? At what time, when some of these issues that have been discussed could be shared with others whether in Baghdad or in Erbil? When is there going to be perhaps a debate about the terms of the agreement? As I said, the options are clear. A federalism that works, a confederal arrangement that is even looser than federalism, or independence, and where are they in the discussion between the two sides? Although public statements are clear, but the question is what's actually taking place.
Such a decision or such an agreement, it needs a strong parliament from both sides. But as you know, both parliaments in Baghdad and in the Iraqi Kurdistan region is deactivated. It's not an active parliament. What the Iraq in Baghdad can do to activate the parliament, and what the Kurds can do to activate their own parliament?
Well, of course, the activation of parliament in Kurdistan I believe that depends on the leadership coming to agreement on the speaker and related issues. I think Kurdistan went through a difficult period over a year ago with the extension of the mandate of the president, and there was a broad agreement by the international community and by many Kurds, particularly the KDP, that the president should be extended given the circumstances in which Kurdistan and the region found itself, which was especially the war against Daesh. And I believe the UN, some of the other powers, the United States, Britain, even Iran thought this was the right thing to do besides some of the Kurds. And that discussion over that issue led to some polarization, especially with the Goran group finding itself in a difficult set of circumstances by the actions they took, the agreements they made, and what they implemented and what they didn't implement. But clearly, the president's there. He is accepted as the president by the international community as well as by many Kurds. And can they reach an agreement on the rest? And I think that I'm not on top of the day-to-day activities, but there have been movements between POK and Goran, perhaps that Goran can come back into the fold, if you like, with the POK umbrella or cooperation with the POK, and a POK KDP understanding on top of that could help move things forward. I think it's very important, given the seriousness of the situation, the issues that are on the table, that progress is made on the political front as progress is made on the battlefield against Daesh, and that I know that Baghdad is also preoccupied right now with the crisis inside the Shia home between different factions, crisis over the fight against Daesh in Fallujah and elsewhere, preparations for what will happen in Mosul. So there is a full agenda, a difficult agenda, but leadership is about leading and about focusing on the big issues and coming to terms with other leaders on issues that will determine the future of the country.
Regarding Erbil and the political situation, many Kurdish leaders or many Kurdish politicians, they say that it's not easy to solve all these problems between each other, between the political groups, and they cannot see any solution in the early future. In such an environment, is there any possibility for a Kurdish state?
Well, there is no question that there are a lot of issues on the table. There are difficult issues. We didn't discuss the economic issues given the low price of oil, the disagreement between Baghdad and Erbil over budget support for Kurdistan, given the suffering that people have not been paid their salaries adequately for some time, given the differences we mentioned before about between the political parties, that some would say, let's get our house in order first, our own internal house in order, and then engage on the issues such as the issue of independence. I've heard that first the Kurds have to get their internal house in order and then discuss or focus on the independence issue. There are others who say, well, they can, as we say in the United States, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can do two things simultaneously, that you can work on the internal issues, but also deal with the strategic issue of the future of the region, because solving the problems internally may be linked to solving these other issues. You can't solve the economic problem unless you have resolved the issue with Baghdad. What kind of a relationship will we have? Will we be receiving the resources that we need, or will we be able to sell our oil and other resources, and which oil? So that you can't deal with one without dealing with the other at the same time. And I can understand that there are differences of view among the Kurds on this issue.
When we're talking about Iraqi Kurdistan region, and especially the economy problems and crisis right now, and financial crisis in the Iraqi Kurdistan, many, they blame the lower prices of oil. Dr. Khalizad, what about corruption?
Well, unfortunately, corruption is endemic in that region. It's not only in the Kurdish area that there is some corruption, but there's corruption in Iraq. There's corruption, across the whole region, and that's a cancer on the body politics of this area. It shows a weakness in terms of rule of law, which is necessary for success. And I've been encouraged by some of the reports that I read that leadership in Kurdistan is focusing on the corruption issue. I hope it does, and that it seeks to tackle this problem seriously. Right now the Kurdish issue is on the agenda in a way because of the instability in Iraq, because of the war against Daesh, because of the regional rivalry, that the focus is on Kurdistan alone. It's in a sense on the agenda of world powers, the future of the region, including Kurdistan. So progress on reform, progress on dealing with corruption will have a positive impact on the attitude of the world towards the Kurds, although there is a positive attitude that is there right now because of the huge sacrifices that the Peshmerga Kurds have made in the struggle against Daesh, and the sacrifices that they have made, and there is confidence and appreciation towards Kurds. So in a sense, the Kurds are on the agenda at this point.
We hear always the Kurdish political authority, they are focusing on fighting corruption. But the question is there the will to fight corruption?
Well, I hope there is. It's necessary. It's important. Success in many ways is not a secret formula in order to be a successful country. And rule of law and treating citizens equally under the law is absolutely an essential ingredient for success. And it's not like discovering some secret formula for solving a disease that no formula has been found for, or no medicine has been found for. All you have to do is to look at the history or the pattern of behavior of countries that are doing well versus countries that are not, and you will find one big difference is tolerance for corruption, lack of reform, lack of accountability, and I hope for the sake of the Kurds that the leadership does rise to the occasion and deal with it. And as I said before, I've heard some encouraging things from Erbil.
Previously, you mentioned that there's a support for Kurds. This support raised during Daesh war. How about post-Daesh? Do you believe that this support will continue?
Well, I believe that the experience with Daesh has demonstrated that the Kurds are a people, a force that you can count on, that could be a good partner. So I believe unless some negative things happen, and that this positive impression that has been created and that has been made on the world will continue. But you can't take it for granted. You need to continue to engage, to work together, and to take the steps necessary that could keep the world positively engaged And it may be that some would say that this is the time also, because of this positive engagement, to put the issue of Kurdistan's future on the agenda, because of there is this positive sentiment that exists right now.
Do you believe there will be an agreement, and especially on the oil, because it's the most complicated case between Erbil and Baghdad? Do you believe there will be such an agreement between both?
Well, if there is a will, there is always a way. I mean, it's about money after all. So, and you can find practical formula. The Constitution of Iraq says income from oil belongs to all Iraqis in all regions and provinces. And so the principle is established in the Constitution, and I don't believe that the Kurds or the Iraqis who are talking they're questioning that principle. The issue is management. The issue is who has the right to sign the contracts, who has the right to develop the fields, who has the right to sell the oil, on sharing the money at the end. And the Constitution is clear on that. The Constitution says a lot of these other things that I mentioned should be done together, but if there is disagreement, then the regional rights are recognized. But unfortunately, in the years since that Constitution was approved, although during my last year as ambassador I tried to get an agreement between Erbil and Baghdad in more detail about an oil law, it did not happen. And so because there is no detailed law regulating new oil fields, Baghdad has tended to want to have more control over this sector than the Kurds, given their experience under Saddam and before, are willing to grant to Baghdad. And that's one of the pressures that this agreement, and especially the draconian measure of cutting off budget support towards Erbil, has led some in Erbil to say we need to go our own way and become an independent country so we can have control over our own destiny, including our financial resources.
My last question. If Baghdad and Erbil, they are asking Ambassador Zalmai Khalizad to give them a solution, what are you going to tell them?
Well, I mean, I would not allow myself on an important issue such as this to offer on television what the answer is. But I believe that the United States and those who care about the people of the area, and I certainly care personally about the people of the area. I've had excellent relations I have many friends among the Kurdish leaders and in Baghdad as well. And if there was something we could do catalytically to facilitate an agreement, we should. We can be helpful, but I think I recognize that the Kurds have suffered for a long time. They're a large group without a state, and that the impulse, the desire for independence is very understandable. And the promises have been made to them historically that have not been honored. But the current compulsions need to be taken into account, and even if one doesn't question what the end point should be, the right of self-determination, which the Constitution recognizes in Iraq, when and how are issues that need to be discussed and an agreement arrived at. And I believe that there are alternative futures facing Iraq and the Kurds, and they need to come to agreement on a future that can work for both people, whether that future is a confederal or a new federal arrangement or independence is something that it's best if it comes out as a result of an agreement between the parties.
Changing the administration in Washington in November.
Yeah.
Does it mean change the policy toward the world of unified Iraq?
Well, there has been a slight change here in the last several months, I would say, since the war against Daesh. As I said before, more of an empathy and sympathy for the Kurds, and a desire to even do things directly for the Kurds without going through Baghdad. And so if I had to guess, that on balance, there is more support for Kurds and the possibility of Kurdish independence politically than before. I think as far as the government policy is concerned, I think while there is an understanding for what the Kurds want ultimately, the U.S. position, as I understand it, has been that anything that happens, it's best that it happens in agreement between the parties, that the region is unstable enough and you don't need yet another fault line of conflict in the region, and therefore an understanding between Baghdad and Erbil embedded in a broader understanding would be the best outcome for the Kurds and for the region.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can I get 2 shot? Okay. So I'm going to need you